Hi there, and welcome back. This is the first of a series of videos about listening as one of the most important language skills. And today we're going to talk about 3 reasons that listening is the highest priority skill to focus on first, and why it's also the easiest to practice. So, there are 4 major language skills: reading, writing, listening, and speaking, and you should work on them synergistically. So why is listening so important, and why is it such a high priority early on? Well, 3 reasons I want to talk about today. The first is that our brains evolved to acquire language through listening first. It's interesting to note that complex language and modern Homo sapiens co-evolved. In other words, we only know of complex language as a feature of modern humans, and we can't really understand human society without language. And of course, in this context, I'm talking about oral language because, by contrast, written language, the first written languages, developed just about 5,000 years ago, whereas the spoken languages evolved over the past few hundreds of thousands of years. And it's interesting to note, and it's not a coincidence, therefore, that babies, the first language skill they focus on is listening as well. So they develop oral language much before and much more naturally than they develop written language. Second reason, listening allows social interaction to begin. So there's a growing body of research that shows that to acquire language, you need social interaction. And social interaction really begins with listening, because if you're in a group of people who are speaking the language that you're trying to acquire, and you don't really speak yet, you don't read and write, but you can understand what's being said, you can be engaged in that conversation. You can, even if you're not speaking a lot, but you can be involved, you can follow what's going on, you can nod, you can say yes or no, and so forth. Whereas if you're not understanding anything, you're just going to tune out. And the importance of social interaction to language acquisition is a clear example of it are semester abroad students, right? You have your typical, stereotypical, let's say, semester abroad student. One is really focused on their studies. They don't make a lot of friends, but they get good grades. They really focus on their academic subjects. The other stereotypical semester abroad student is going out to bars, dating, making a lot of native speaking friends. Who acquires the language better? My experience and speaking to others about this, it's always the second type, right? It's the extroverted, socializing foreigner that acquires language more quickly. Okay, third reason that listening is so important early on is that you need to acquire the correct mental pronunciation before you get too far with reading. So what do I mean by this? I think for the evolutionary reasons that I mentioned in the beginning of the video, when we read, we tend to verbalize mentally whatever we're reading. Now, if you learn to read in a language before you really get any of the pronunciation in your head, or the correct pronunciation, you're going to read following phonetic rules from your native language or some other language, and not the language that you're trying to learn. In other words, you're going to be there reading text, and in your head, you're going to be pronouncing the words all wrong. And that forms habits. And so once you then transition to listening and speaking, you're going to have to overcome these habits, and that's extremely difficult to do. I've dealt with students who have this problem, and it's hard to ever get their pronunciation up to par when they've gone too far with reading before listening. Now, the good news is that listening is also, I'd say by far, the easiest language skill to practice. Now, when I say it's the easiest, I don't mean it's easier to understand a language than it is to read or even to speak or write necessarily. What I mean is that whereas you need a lot of motivation to write in a language, depending on your preferences and your personality, you do need a good deal of motivation sometimes to read and to speak. But to listen, really, you don't have to be in the mood for it. You don't have to be highly motivated. Because who doesn't like to sit back and listen to great music? Who doesn't like to binge watch a series on Netflix or watch great cinema? right? So listening is something you can do whether or not you feel highly motivated, whether or not you're energized or you're tired. There is so much material available also in the major languages that most people study. So you're never going to run out of videos on YouTube, series on Netflix, movies, and again, pretty much any free time you have, any downtime, you need to relax, you can put on one of these listening sources and relax while furthering your language acquisition. So stay tuned for the next videos where I'm going to talk about great specific sources for listening and also give you a game plan for listening at different levels of proficiency, beginner, intermediate, and advanced levels. And finally, I'll answer some frequently asked questions on the subject. So until next time, bye-bye.